And we are back for chapter 3 of Chasing Cyan. And I just want to let everyone know, if you are interested in editing services, as of the time of this recording, which is February 20th, 25, I am offering a choose your own price option. You can find details of that on my Facebook profile, which is under Tirza Hawkins, and I currently have it pinned at the top. If you're coming to this at a later time when that is no longer pinned, then there will be a link in the description to find my current editing services, if they're available, and what those rates are. Okay, I have set to reviewing, and we are on chapter 3. Can't we just tell them one of us fell ill? Okay, so I don't like the start of this chapter to not have some sort of dialogue or action tag, because the next name that we have up is not Cyan's, so I'm assuming that Cyan is the one that said this. But then we have Big Mama as the next name that is up, so I kind of would like some sort of something there. Big Mama sighed as she put the finishing touches on my hair. She'd slathered it in pomade and rolled it in curlers after breakfast, hoping to turn my flat, straight hair into bouncy waves. It was a lost cause, and we both knew it. Okay, so this is something that is vague and, means a whole bunch to different people. So, this could be, hairspray, or, the last little bit of pinning something down. So, honestly, I would say to describe this. So just getting a little bit more vivid here. I said as my comment, bring us into this, because it can mean so many different things. Is she adding a touch of hairspray? Is she tucking a little curl in? Get vivid. It's just a little, it's like a blanket statement that can mean so many things. And then we have, it was a lost cause, and we both knew it. So there's nothing technically wrong with that, but it's almost like, what is? Hoping to turn my flat, straight hair into bouncy waves, and it was a lost cause, and we both knew it. So I have really flat, straight hair. But not everybody does. So I feel like just adding in a little bit to that, something to the effect of, no matter how much product you use, my strands, we're going to be straight within an hour. Just something to that effect. That way everybody knows what's going to happen. Because if you don't have that flat, straight hair, you might not know. And we don't want our readers to be confused. They aren't going to accept that. Chin up, sweet child. It's only dinner. She stepped back, circling me to admire her work. Again, I want to know, what does her face look like here? Like, is she happy with her work? Or is there a hint of a disappointed frown? Like, give us some insight. It's time. Don't forget your cloak and our contribution. Everybody in town was expected to bring a dish to any town-wide celebration. Could this be local? So this would get rid of some repetition. If they used local or within, told us to specify a certain distance, that would avoid having everybody in town and town-wide celebration in the same sentence. My grandmother's cookies were always a hit, especially since they were expensive, if anyone cared to purchase them outside of the occasion. She only ever used the best ingredients for her famous baked goods, many homegrown and treated with love. It's a really weird paragraph here. I'm not sure what to do with it. Like, I'm just going to move on. I'm not sure what to do with that. Grabbing the basket, I asked if it was necessary to take the unsightly crimson cloak she always forced me to wear. See, okay, like, is there some sort of pride about this? It just seems really random. So I'm asking, what is the significance of this? Because it just seems really random. So give us a little bit of how the character feels about it. If it's important to the story. Then also, I want to know how this, I need to turn off Grammarly. No, I want to turn you off. Quit. There we go. Okay. How does she feel about wearing the cloak? As we have an unsightly crimson cloak, but like, does she dread it? Is it just an embarrassment? Like, what is the importance of this? This is where all of the details here need to be important when we're writing. So we can't just throw things in because we think it's a good idea. And it's all supposed to give us some insight into our characters. So that's where The important part about this is how Cyan is relating to these things. It's for safety, she scolded, giving me the look over her spectacles that meant end of discussion. See, this is perfect. This is good character building. We all know, like most of us know this look. Even if there isn't somebody in our life that does it, we know that look. Fine. See. Fine. Like, this just begs for some action in my... Does she pout? Does she dramatically don the cloak? Like, it's asking for something a little bit more. Like, we need to know. We don't know this character yet, so we don't know how they're saying that phrase unless you're giving us something else from it. Make sure to check the mirror before we leave. Okay, they're right there. I feel like this should just be... Check the mirror before we leave. I'm quite pleased with the way your hair turned out. The evening meal was uneventful, thankfully. Only a few girls close to my age approached to tell me how amazing my hair looked. Big Mama had pulled it off, somehow. Does this mean that otherwise she was left alone and she likes this? It's like, if you're telling us this, like, again, we need them to know the importance of it. Yeah, it's just, that only... is throwing me off. My closest friend eyed me warily and asked if I was doing okay, but even she only stuck around for a minute or two. Okay, we need a name. We can't talk about the main character's closest friend without giving them a name. Like, even if they never come up in the story again, the main character knows their name. So they would be thinking of them by their name. But even she only stuck... We have another only. So that's a bit much close together. We don't need two onlys. But even she only stuck around for a minute or two. Everyone else stayed mostly in their own family units. They either did or they didn't. Everyone else stayed in their own family units, probably terrified of what would happen when I refused the constable. I know I was. yeah, so that's a good, we have the character guessing why everyone is just hanging out with their families. When it happened, he made sure to gather okay, I know I was. See, when it happened, he made sure to gather the entire village in front of the large fire in the center of the town square where the light was most prevalent by calling for all citizens to join us. It was a really long sentence, and we need to, like, make this happen. He was shouting for... And then all too soon, he was shouting for... See, he's gathering the entire village and then calling for all citizens to join us. There's a lot. So I'm just going to leave it here. And then... put a note for walk us through this, make it happen rather than just telling us it did. And we also need some internal thoughts or feelings from our main character here. This is a big moment. This is what everything has been leading up to so far, so we can't just skip through this. I hadn't expected him to wait for the moon to come out for a while. I thought he'd changed his mind since celebrations usually ended. Okay, so this needs to be moved up a paragraph, because all of this was thoughts that was happening before he started putting on his big show. So, yeah. Make us feel the nerves of waiting for this to happen, and then make us feel the dread of when he actually opened his mouth and started the big show. We need that moved up. So we have, he asked me to stand in front of him while he took a knee and reached for my hand. And then something about so something more like, to my horror, he pointed to the ground in front of him, indicating where he wanted me to stand, is what I have. Of course, the author, can change that. It's just an idea of getting this rewritten a little bit stronger. We want this a lot more active rather than passive. Okay, so I have something to that effect. And then I'm suggesting, and then the heat in her cheeks builds again. I guess this isn't in parentheses because it's not direct. But like something like the heat in her cheeks builds again as he took a knee. It would be built. I gotta remember we're in past tense. And reached for my hand. Okay, put us in this moment. Such a beautiful woman you've become. He called out the words to the crowd, and so speaking only to me. See, like, just... Well, yeah, that is a good way of, like, having him, put on a show. That's immediately what I thought about, is that he's putting on a show. Oh, how I've enjoyed watching you grow all these years, my fair red, he began, using the nickname I detested. This isn't he began if he's already begun. He has already begun. See, I'd rather have her cringe. She should cringe or something, the nickname, rather than like we have it. We're told twice that she doesn't like it, using the nickname I detested, and then the annoyance from being called red. So I feel like the first one should be more of a cringe, and then it'll read better when we come to the annoyance from being called red. For the last few years, probably triggered my distaste for wearing the crimson cloak Big Mama insisted I wear. Okay, but she just has a distaste for the cloak. Like, we already have two wearing it. Triggered my distaste for the crimson cloak Big Mama insisted I wear. Having the retired huntsman use it casually in front of everyone in town irked me. Irked me. This would be fine if we had been, like, given some reactions up above. I was like, does it irk her or is it grate on her? Yet I couldn't interrupt. It would be impolite. I just feel like, as much as I wanted to something, what does she want to do or say here? I couldn't interrupt. It would be impolite. Like, this is it's just too mellow for something that sounds as, you know, that we're supposed to buy into, that she doesn't want this. Like, we need to know how much she doesn't want this. I blessed you myself when you were but a sweet baby attached to your mother's tit the day she came to visit her mother and show off her beloved firstborn. He continued. Okay, so first, gross. Can we break this up? I blessed you myself when you were but a sweet baby attached to your mother's tit. The day. So this is something I'm going to ask the author to do, because it can just change the flow of how it sounds according to where you would break this up. I think that would make it more dramatic and read easier. Otherwise, it's just really long and we're like, wait, what is going on? He continued. I can't begin to explain how difficult it's been to stand by, waiting for this day, anticipating this exact moment. I want a visual. We really need a visual of him. Whoop. Is he still... So he's still on his knees, I think. Yeah, we kind of need a visual of his face. Like, you know, I feel like, you know, his eyes could be beaming up at her with pride, or like forced tears, something like that. Okay, I accidentally put a W there. Oh yeah, see, forced tears, because then he sniffed and wiped his eyes. Although she might not know that they're forced, so... We're just going to go with that. I can't begin to explain how difficult it's been to stand by, waiting for this day, anticipating this exact moment. He sniffed and wiped his eyes. See, I knew he had tears in them. I just want to be told that sooner. As if he sniffed, as if he'd become overwhelmed with emotions. No, he sniffed and wiped his eyes as if overwhelmed with emotion. Yeah, right. That's her. So that needs to be another line. Do you remember taking your first steps during the winter solstice here in town? I do. Man, this guy's giving me the ick. This is such an ick. This is all such an ick. Such an ick for a proposal. Well done with his dialogue. We just need more from her during this. This is a lot of him. And I would think she has more reactions here. We need to see them. Taking your first steps during the winter solstice here in town. I do. You'd save them for our celebration night, as if you'd meant for me to see them. It was my pleasure to observe you showing off your reading skills years later when your parents bothered to bring you for visits. That does kind of fit with the way he's talking. It was my pleasure. Again, this is just a really long sentence. This is what I would do with it. Because we need a little bit of a transition here. And then years later, when your parents brought you for visits, it was my pleasure to observe you showing off your reading skills. I almost feel like we could have another comma. And it's like, we don't need the bothered. Though back then, you spent the majority of your life playing with young men from your parents' village, instead of agreeing to stay here as I requested, near the man you were born to marry. Is this really her choice? Like, he sounds like he's blaming her for something that was outside of her control. But I just feel like it could be phrased. I don't know, a little differently. Whispers broke out after the last statement. But none loud enough to hear. Well, they heard the whispers. Are they hearing the whispers, or are they just seeing the people whispering then? So, does she hear them whispering, or is she just watching them whisper to one another? He waited for the chatter to cease before continuing. Chatter is louder. I almost feel like he waited for this is what I feel like he was waiting for. He waited for the attention to return to him before continuing. Your parents' accident was tragic. I can't be glad for it. Nobody could. What a waste of healthy young adults in a time when their contribution was dearly needed. Okay, you just had young men. Just had young men and young adults, so can we change one of those? In a time when their contribution was dearly needed. Yet with every tragedy comes a silver lining. Having you move close enough to keep my eyes on you is a huge relief. Yet with every tragedy comes a silver lining. I almost feel like forced. It forced you to move close enough that I could keep my eyes on you. And that was a huge release. It forced you to move close enough what about for me instead of that? It forced you to move close enough for me. Yeah, I'm going to put that, to keep my eyes on you. And that was a huge relief. Too bad you never seemed interested in my affections before now. Well, she still doesn't. I feel like it'd be better without that now. Too bad you never seemed interested in my affections before. I could have spent the last several years courting you properly. Oh, well. Can we break this up with like a waving? Oh, well, the past is just that, past. I'm glad you've had a change of heart. He smiled up at me, expectation in his beady eyes. Beady eyes. Oh, love it. She regards him as a rodent. When I made no effort to agree and tried to tug my hand away, his grip tightened. My fingers throbbed from the pressure. Okay, I feel like this would be stronger if we had. He smiled up at me, expectation in his beady eyes. I made no effort to agree and tried to tug. But then we have it, he and I and his. But we could put this first. It could be expectation in his beady eyes. He smiled up at me. This is one way we can. I made no effort to agree and tried to tug my hand away. Period. His grip tightened. Could be until or. Yeah. Until my fingers throb from the pressure. I just think that reads a little stronger. Because we don't the grip tightening has to do with her fingers throbbing. The last few years have been the hardest. Witnessing you blossom, but having to wait until the day we finally walk down the aisle to hold you the way I've always wanted to. Why is this trailing off, though? That is the end of the sentence. I guess that's just to denote, like, his tone. The way I've always wanted to. This pause went undisturbed. Unlike before, the onlookers kept quiet. Not a single murmured whisper of disbelief or agreement could be heard. Everyone seemed to simultaneously hold their breath. Okay, so this is a telling. Like, we could show, not a single murmured, whispered. The crowd stood so still that I couldn't be sure that anyone was even breathing. That's how you make something like that. A bit more from the character's point of view. As he waited for a reaction, any reaction, well, she doesn't know this. As he waited for my response. So, waiting for a reaction. Any reaction would be from, like, the main character's point of view. He's, like, waiting for her response. A movement caught the corner of my eye. I tilted my head in an attempt to make out the shape, though it seemed to pace in the shadows. To make out the shape that something can't, like, it's not seeming to make out the shape that paced in the shadows just beyond the light of the fire. The wolf. There's no response to this. A much smaller version of the beast I'd seen in my sleep stalked the boundaries of my birthday celebration. I could make out the markings easily despite the darkness consuming his image. It was him. Had to be. Like, oh, why is that doing the whole thing? There has not been any response by the main character to anything in this chapter. So that is one thing I'm going to say at the end. All right. It's a much smaller version of the beast I'd seen in my sleep stalked the boundaries of my birthday celebration. I could make out the markings easily despite the darkness consuming his image. So let's despite the darkness consuming his image, the familiar markings were clear. It's like, I can make out the markings. Well, yeah, if you're, just tell us what they're noticing about the markings, because then we know that the main character can see them. It was him. Had to be. I'd seen those patterns in the real world as well. On my trips into town, in the trees. What patterns? Like the patterns on the wolf. So like, I don't remember if there was specific, like, are we talking like swirls like this? If this is a pattern, describe it. Especially if she's seen it elsewhere. I'd seen those patterns in the real world as well. As on my trips into town, in the trees just out of reach, I'd seen him in my old village too. Okay, we want to get rid of the see. Anytime we have like I see, I saw, like, just tell us what they were seeing or sawing. Seeing or sawing what they saw. Those patterns do something like that. Those patterns followed me in the real world as well. On my trips into town, in the trees, just out of reach. Okay, were they in the trees and then just out of reach, or were they in the trees just out of reach? We don't need a comma there. I'd seen him in my old village too. I almost want something more like he'd been in my old village too, but that's still like super passive. Could do something like he'd haunted my old village too. At first, I'd been nervous, but over time, curiosity took hold. Some days, I would stop and speak to it in a soothing voice. Once in a while, I'd toss our scraps onto an old plate at the edge of the forest in hopes he didn't starve. Usually, I only caught a glimpse of him from my own yard or beyond the tree line from the long dirt road into town. So I feel like all of this did none of this cross her mind when she woke up after she'd had that dream? I just feel like that would have been a better time, because like having this interrupt this scene putting it all right here interrupts the scene and slows it down. It's just kind of, we've just screeched to a halt, I feel like. But he'd never come this close to the village before. Not that I knew of. Nobody besides my grandmother had ever believed that he existed. The whole village used to tease me relentlessly, calling me awful names, claiming the area unsuitable for wolves, laughing at the idea of a wolf stalking me from one village to the next. Orphan wolf crier, attention seeker, storyteller, liar. Just like in the tale of the little boy, he'd seen a wolf too. I had to be wrong. Wolves had never lived this far south, only Megan. Okay, so this... It had to be him. Had to be. But he'd never come this close to the village before, not that I knew of. This works here. This part works here. But then also I would move I don't even know that the only Megan matters. We don't even know who Megan is. If that's the name of the best friend, we didn't have that up above. I just think it was something that she thought about earlier, so I would move it to the rest of the reminiscing of where she'd seen the wolf before. It doesn't flow well here in the middle of the proposal. I feel like it would have been on her mind earlier after the dream. And then we're like, who the F is Megan? Because you didn't tell us earlier a name for the best friend. And that's who I think this is. Oh, it's going. I want to create. It doesn't like it because it's connected to a comment. Who the F is Megan? We've never heard this name in the story before, so it doesn't have meaning for us here. A sharp tug on my hand drew my attention back to the wrinkled man kneeling before me. This was need to know information sooner. That would have really have made the rest of it like even more ick. So we definitely need more of a description of him from the beginning. Of him coming into the scene. All right. Will you? He's really getting down to it. The distraction had caused me to forget my current predicament. Again, ugly older man. I stare at the ugly older man as he tightened his grip. Okay, he's already tightened his grip once. Is he gonna pull off her hand now? Yeah, we needed this reaction from her way sooner. Come on. No comment. He already tightened his grip earlier. He's on the verge of breaking her hand already. I mean, he was making it numb. I feel like this sentence, the distraction had caused me to forget my current predicament, could be stronger. I just want this to be way stronger. Something. Like, in my distraction, I'd forgotten my current predicament. Reality returns to me like a ton of bricks in my stomach. Just something more. I'm sorry. Will I what? Again, we just don't have enough from her. She's in the middle of a crowd receiving a marriage proposal that she's been dreading from a dude who disgusts her. Except for a one hand tug. She hasn't moved a muscle. Instantly, I realized my mistake. Okay. Yes, it says, will you marry me? He growled between clenched teeth, quiet enough that only I would hear. So, what gave her a clue that she'd made a mistake? And what's happening in her body because of it? Will you marry me? He growled between clenched teeth, quiet enough that only I would hear. Your next words better be yes. I'm sorry, but the answer is no. See, this is where we could use an adverb. Instead of I made sure to speak loud enough, I purposefully spoke loud enough that there would be zero confusion about my response. Okay, you can't possibly mean that he shrieked before realizing all eyes were on him. Before, what did he do to let her know that he realized this? This is like a point of view shift because he had a physical response and the author knows that he realized that all eyes were on him, but the other person doesn't exactly know that that's what his train of thought is. So this is a POV shift. I mean, you must need a few days to mull it over. See, there would be visual cues about him collecting himself. Also, like, did he jump to his feet when he shrieked? How did he get himself back under composure? Did he straighten his clothes? How did his face change from anger to composed? Just things like that we need to know here to really just get into this scene. Okay, so this is when he stood. I feel like he would have stood when he shrieked. But this is up to the author. Because he can just turn to the crowd now. He stood, turned to the crowd, and announced the end of my celebration, demanding everyone head home as soon as the town square was cleaned up. So we've just had so much monologue from him, and now we're just going to wrap this up in something so show us how he shouts orders to everyone, because like he's like, party's over. Everyone needs to go home. Clean up the town square first. Yeah. Party's over. Everyone needs to go home. Wait. Clean up the town square first. Then go straight to your homes. I'm just being dramatic. She can do what she wants with it. But it's like, dude's throwing a fit. Show us his fit. Then he threw my hand away from him. I feel like he would have done this when he said party's over or whatever you're going to use, saying the celebration's over. Wouldn't he have done this when he announced that the celebration was over? Then he threw my hand away from him and huffed the entire way out of the sea of confused bystanders. Okay, so first we don't need a then, because this is a story. You are always telling us what happens then and next and stuff. Throwing my hand from his. He huffs the entire way out of the square. The confused sea of bystanders. Parts 4. The confused sea of bystanders parted without a word. Something like that. That went well, Big Mama said from behind me. Yeah, so I stand by this. There wasn't a response from the main character about anything that happened in this chapter. She fell really flat. All right. That was chapter 3 of Chasing Cyan. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. And I can't wait to see what happens next time. Thanks for tuning in.